Sean Childs, the President of the Women's Engineering Society, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you all to our International Women in Engineering Day celebration for 2021. We started with a National Women in Engineering Day back in 2014, and we've grown year on year, going international in 2017, and with an annual reach and impact of this amazing event increasing exponentially and now into the millions. And indeed, you can see the impact of everything that we're doing and all of your efforts in the latest Engineering UK statistics, where the number of women working in engineering has increased from 12.37% back in 2018 to 14.5% now. And if I reflect back into the 1980s, when it was just languishing at 7%, this is an extraordinary effort. And it really is through role modelling and showcasing how amazing engineering is, and more importantly, how amazing the ladies working within engineering are as well. With the impacts of the global pandemic still very much with us though, we thought it was very apt for our theme for this year to be Engineering Heroes. We have some fantastic speakers for this afternoon, who I will introduce shortly. But first, a few housekeeping notes. Whilst we cannot meet in person and network or discuss the speakers or event, at this event, there is a chat function. So please have a look, and you can use that to talk to each other throughout the event, and of course post questions for our fantastic presenters. But please do remember that everything you post in the chat is public, so that everybody will be able to see your comments. You won't be able to have personal conversations, so just bear that in mind. We will also be recording the webinar, and this will be shared with you all so that you can listen back at your leisure and of course share amongst colleagues. Please do also share the event as we go through and comment on social media. We were trending on Twitter last year, and we want to get that buzz again. So please tweet and Insta post to @InWed1919, and our hashtags are InWed21 and hashtag Engineering Heroes, as you see in front of you there. So please post away and really get us socially buzzing. As this is an international event, we've already had some local events around the globe, and I particularly wanted to extend a welcome to our audiences around the world. And so we have a special welcome message for them to scroll through. And clearly, I think the relevant people will be able to read these messages. But basically, it's fantastic celebration of International Women in Engineering Day. And after the success of all this campaign is due to all of our amazing members and collaborators around the globe, and their local events and celebrations have really brought us all together. So thank you to everybody. I also wanted to thank our sponsors this year, without whom we could not stage this event. And you'll see them all listed there. It really is amazing to have all of their support and to be able to partner with them. And talking of partners, we also have a great list of media partners who of course enable us to extend our reach and really raise the bar and make sure that we get the messages out there and continue to have a greater impact and increase the number of women working in engineering. And so on to the main event. Our patron, UNESCO, the United Kingdom for National Commission for UNESCO, has been with us throughout this great proceedings and for the many years since we put the event together. And I think it's their global reach that helps us to have such an amazing list of speakers for you today. And with that in mind, I wanted to move on to our first speaker for this afternoon, who is Major Angela Laycock. She has served as an officer in the Royal Engineers for over 15 years. She's had operational tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan and is a chartered civil engineer. She currently leads a team of military engineers who specialise in the design of physical security measures on operations. And in the last couple of years, she has supported UK resilience by deploying to Whaley Bridge after the Toddbrook Reservoir dam collapse, and more recently to Birmingham for the construction of the Nightingale Hospital there. So I'm very excited to introduce Angela and to invite her to turn on her camera and microphone. Hopefully we should be able to see her pop up. Now, as I said previously, please do post any questions for her in the chat, as we will be fielding a couple of questions at the end of her session. But for now, I shall pass you over to Angela. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, and thank you very much. Just a quick comms and video check. And fingers crossed
your comms are a bit crackly, actually.
Okay, right. Let me see if I can move. Is that any better?
Much better, thank you.
Excellent. And can you see my screen?
Indeed, I can. Absolutely.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me today. It's certainly an honour and a privilege to be chosen to speak today. And hopefully I'm going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of my career and some of the emergency engineering challenges that I've faced both as a military engineer and as a chartered civil engineer. So I basically started my life as a young Bedfordshire Army cadet, following in my big sister's footsteps. She was one of the first girls in the Army Cadets, and she really enjoyed it. I was actually initially recruited just to fill a gap at a Remembrance Day parade, and she basically had a week to teach me how to march, so I didn't make an idiot of myself. And at school, I either wanted to be a PE teacher, but I was worried about funding through university because nobody in my family had ever been before. And the other option was to join the army as a soldier and then become a physical training instructor. But I was actually encouraged by my teachers and some of the Army Cadet instructors to go and do my A-levels because they realised I really enjoyed maths and science. But at that point, I didn't even know what engineering actually was. So luckily I found out about Welbeck College, which was the Army Sixth Form college, and it was designed to produce technically trained officers into the Army. So initially I was told by the Army Careers Office and even the Council Careers Advisor that I was unlikely to get in and I probably shouldn't get my hopes up. But instead, that sort of fueled my fire to go and prove them wrong and end up being the first female senior under officer, which led the combined cadet force at Welbeck and led the passing out parade. And that's when I really realised that I'd made the right choice and an Army career would really suit me. So from Welbeck, I was really lucky to be awarded a Welbeck scholarship to study engineering at Emmanuel College at Cambridge. And it was a great degree course because the first 2 years were general engineering, and then I specialised into civil structural and environmental engineering. So real, still broad scope, broad brush stuff. But it was really good to have done such a broad course and then just specialise because that certainly helped me in some of the technical challenges that I'm going to elaborate on a little bit today. And then after uni, I went to Sandhurst and I was commissioned into the Royal Engineers, who also sponsored me through university. So I did some trips away with those. And I was actually awarded the top cadet prize, which is called the Sword of Honour. And I was lucky enough to be awarded it by the Queen herself. And they got to sit next to her at lunch, which was great. And as a junior officer, I then completed a couple of troop commander appointments, and I deployed to Iraq as a construction troop commander and Afghanistan as a search troop commander. And I'll talk a bit more about those later. And that's when I realised that technical engineering was actually for me. So in 2013, I enrolled in the 2-year professional engineer training course, which is run by the Royal Engineers. And that included a really interesting site visit or site attachment to Battersea Power Station redevelopment. So I got to climb up the chimney, which you can see there. And then on promotion to major, you then go and complete staff officer jobs. And the most recent one looked at critical national infrastructure, which again was a really interesting role, both on the military and the civilian side of things. And then for the last 2 years, I've been officer commanding 502 Specialist Team Royal Engineers, and they specialise in force protection engineering, which is physical security design. And that's when I've had quite a big role in providing expertise for a tasking that we get called the Infrastructure Response Force. And now I work in Army headquarters at the Technical Infrastructure Support Cell, and I'm also refurbishing my house, which is why I've got things covering up the wood chip wallpaper and the serving hatch in the background. So some of my first sort of engineering jobs were actually on the Iraq tour, where I was a construction troop commander for 6 months whilst we were serving in Basra. I was leading a team of about 30 people, and we had a mix of trades and experience from guys that have just done their welding course to people with plant operating experience for about 10 years. We also had bricklayers and electricians as well. So one week we were actually called up to do an emergency hasty bridge repair. And after a quick recce within the daytime when all the traffic was still crossing, we were able to work out which panels had actually failed. Some had such big holes in them that the lorries were actually driving round, causing real huge traffic issues. And we came up with a plan to do an overnight closure where we were then going to weld these steel sheets over the worst of the damage. During the closure, I then sort of took it upon myself to do a full bridge survey, and I was able to highlight and label up, as you can see in the picture, all of the other damaged panels. And then from that, we could establish another 2-night closure where we could go and repair all these panels using some proper bridge panels that the US Army had procured. So we went back a couple of weeks later and replaced these 20 panels, making the bridge fully trafficable again. So it was a really great opportunity to go and use our skills to make a pretty big difference to the local population. Also on that tour, I was involved in the major construction project, which was building a boat slipway in the grounds of Basra Palace. So it wasn't initially an emergency engineering task, but we did have to come up with a pretty quick response when I noticed some of this cracking appearing in the retaining wall. So the local plant operator had cut back the soil to such a steep angle that in the short term it stayed upright, and it also had the concrete protecting it from the water. But as the soil started to lose its strength in the long term, these cracks started to form and bits of it started slipping away. So I first noticed this on my morning site inspections, and we basically had to come up with a quick plan with the military plant foreman who'd done the design to use some of the aluminium matting normally used to make helicopter landing sites and backfill the excavation to get it back to its more natural angle of repose where it was safer. So luckily we got this in place before that big crack that you can see in the bottom right hand picture at the top opened up. And basically that could have caused a catastrophic collapse of the whole retaining wall, not only ruining the whole project, but potentially endangering people if we had them in the excavation at the same time. So this tour, it certainly helped me learn how to think and practice thinking on my feet and plan using advice from some of these more experienced tradespeople that we've got in the Royal Engineers. And it also did feel like we were doing a bit of scrap heap challenge where we had to just go around the local area, see what we could find to make do as well. And there you go. That was the final piece that you can see, still visible on Google Maps today. So moving on to my next experience, this was for a totally different type of emergency, and it was actually bomb hunting. So I was trained as a Royal Engineer Search Advisor to deploy to Helmand Province in Afghanistan, where I led a small team who were responsible for searching for improvised explosive devices, IEDs, and these were to be destroyed or made safe by our high-threat explosive ordnance device operators. So we'd be on call for these 10-line EOD requests where if a unit found a suspicious device that needed to be dealt with immediately, we'd either fly out there, drive or patrol to the location, locate the device, and then look for any other secondary devices that might have been placed to target the first responders. Some of these were buried, some were surface laid, and they also had a variety of different trigger mechanisms from victim operated pressure pads to remote controlled, like radio controlled devices. So as a search advisor, it was my role to take control of the situation on the ground, to choose and clear an incident control point, and then plan and search any further clearance operations. So as soon as we got the call, I'd have to go and quickly research the area and look at any previous incidents that might have happened, so you understand the trends in the area. And that was all whilst the team were just getting ready and getting the kit ready. And when we arrived on the ground, I'd have to do a very quick risk assessment and basically to hastily plan how we were going to search. And then I'll let the team commander manage the searchers whilst I maintained communications with our force protection and any other formations going on in the area, because we were actually sort of on the front line, if not in front of the front line sometimes. Something I didn't tell my mum at the time. And then this tour, it certainly helped me basically quickly assess, risk assess and hastily plan something. And that's something that I'm not normally comfortable with, because I'm one of these procedural planner type people that like to have it all written out. And I do try and avoid these situations of making it up as you go along where possible. So I think being forced into it certainly helped me become more comfortable with rapid planning, but it also did make me realise that I was more suited to the technical engineering and the construction, like I did in the Iraq tour, over this sort of EOD search or combat engineering. So that's what basically inspired me to apply to do the Royal Engineers Professional Engineer Training, which is a pathway to become a chartered engineer and a professionally qualified engineer in the Army. And yeah, there you can see pretty much how close we would get to some of the things and how we destroy them. So following my professional qualified engineer training, I completed a couple of staff jobs and my training to become a staff officer at the Defence Academy at Shrivenham. So there's a bit of a gap between that and my next involvement in emergency engineering. And it came one late Friday morning as my car was packed ready to go home for the weekend. And we'd been watching some of the events unfold at Whaley Bridge on TV over the previous 24 hours. So the dam had started to collapse after the heavy rain had caused the water to flow over the spillway as designed. But because there was a small void under the spillway and under the concrete, that had just started to erode away. And this void under the concrete plus the load of the water caused some of these panels to collapse into that hole. So the military were already on site. They were supporting with the Chinook helicopters, and these were flying 3 or 4 of these 1-ton ballast sacks in to fill the void. And that was already under the advice of some of the dam engineers to help prevent this collapse of the clay core of the dam wall. So my works group who cover this UK resilience duty called the Infrastructure Response Force. They were tasked to provide a civil engineer with geotechnical experience to deploy to support the local resilience forum. So on my arrival, I met some of the engineers that had already been working on the problem over the last 24 hours, and also met the Prime Minister as well. And it became apparent that they already had plenty of dam and reservoir engineering expertise, as the chap that was leading it was the head of the British Dam Society, and there were many chartered engineers from the Environment Agency and Canals and Rivers Trust. So I soon realised that I was a bit out of my depth, and that my couple of modules at university and my professionally qualified engineer course in soil mechanics probably wasn't going to add much value to their calculations. However, I decided to go for a bit of a site wander around and look at the bigger picture and start to offer practical advice, such as one you can see here, which was replacing the sandbags that the fire brigade had put by the inlet weir with these gabion baskets to prevent any subsequent overflow, because it was this bypass channel that was preventing any more water from filling up the reservoir that they were trying to empty. They also wanted to know if we had any military bridging assets which could bypass over this, go over this bypass channel, because they were looking at getting the big 10-ton high volume Environment Agency pump so they could draw down much quicker. So I was able to go and take a wander of the route and have a look at where they were planning on putting this, and just rule out that as an option, because it posed such a risk to reducing the flow of this bypass channel, and their strategy that they currently had of using lots of little smaller pumps that they could move and they had redundancy in, which allowed them to have continuous operation. It was actually working really well. So I think just being able to provide that advice and saying, actually, you're doing a bloody good job, carry on, was really quite useful. So although the military think of us as specialist technical engineers, I certainly found myself there as a real generalist in the situation. But it turns out that it wasn't really a bad thing, because everyone was just so focused on concentrating on the actual dam rather than the wider issue of preventing more water coming in, that I was able to still offer some really useful advice. So my big sort of takeaway from the task, when I look back at it, was that I didn't need to be concerned, and you shouldn't be concerned if you think you're underqualified. Just step back from everything, have a look at the bigger picture, and then find somewhere where you might be able to add value that someone might not have even thought about. So I think definitely the highlights of my career as an infrastructure engineer, certainly over the last few years, was my involvement in the construction of the NHS Nightingale Hospital in Birmingham. So again, we were all sent back home to work from home at the start of the pandemic, and I'd been there for about a week redecorating my flat, and we were all called back late to camp on the Monday night, about a week after the start of this national lockdown. So some of my colleagues had already been involved in the setup of the London Nightingale Hospital, which was at the Excel Centre, and we'd been keeping updated on their task and their progress, and my team offered a bit of security advice for them as well. So when we got sent back to camp, I was deployed to the National Exhibition Centre on the 26th of March. And with me, I took a clerk of works mechanical who had a HND in mechanical engineering. And we went to conduct an initial recce to see whether it could be converted into a hospital, just like the Excel Centre. So we were supporting the NHS regional director, and she didn't have a technical background or much information on the Excel build. So we were basically there to assist her by leading the discussions and the technical discussions with the NEC managers. And this was to discuss how we could convert the NEC to facilitate a change of use from an exhibition centre to a hospital. And from this visit, we basically concluded that it was a suitable location because it had the same facilities like the Excel, and both the space as well to be converted into these huge hospital wards, which is what they required. So with that, I suggested that later we held a detailed recce in 2 days' time with wider stakeholders, both from the NHS project team and some of the NEC group technical experts, such as their facilities managers. So I took 3 other people from my team, and we basically split down into small groups to look at the different work strands. So one included the layout, how many beds we were going to fit in. One looked at the electrical and the mechanical demands on the buildings, and another one looked at the logistical elements such as storage, access and transport, and all the other things required to run it as a hospital. So the aim of the day was effectively to conduct a gap analysis. So I had what it needed to look like based on the Excel data, and then we had to go around and look at what was missing. So we could easily highlight the constraints or the deficiencies that the NHS would need to start designing the process and procuring as soon as possible. So I must actually confess that my most technical part of the involvement was having to do a space analysis on my little spreadsheet there to establish how many beds we could fit into each hall. And this was mostly based on data from the size of the bed space wards from the Excel. And it was then a bit of an engineering guesstimate about how much space I think would be usable. And we had to take an allowance for storage, the ward run, so you could actually wheel trolleys up and down. And also in the NEC, they had these floor ducts every 6 meters where the cables would have to run. So this data was urgently required by NHS England because they were trying to model and calculate demand in each region and then see what facilities they could either use at the current hospitals and increase the COVID wards there, or open up facilities like this. So I was able to put this suggestion forwards, which was to use 5 halls for the first phase, which would give them about 500 beds. And then phase 2 would be the expansion, bringing them to 2,000 beds. And then if they used the full area, they could expand out to a maximum of over 4,000 beds, which would be the same size as the XL. So over the weekend, I also then took my newly posted in design draftsman to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Birmingham. And this is where we met up with the NHS project team and the Royal College of Defence Medicine personnel, the military personnel, to come up with this concept design. So we were able to take the CAD files of the halls from the NEC and then add the bed space layout designs that had come from the Excel Centre build. And this basically, it helped us quickly confirm the accuracy of my bed space requirements. And luckily, my spreadsheet was roughly right. And I noticed that some of the halls were suitable for about 125 beds, while the others were bigger and could fit in about 250 beds. And this was occurred to me, it was very similar of how we actually design and build our modular operational tented camps with either modules of 125, 250 or 500. So with the military personnel who were supporting, they were looking at resource planning as well. We decided to split each ward up into 4 rows of 6 beds, which would then become a ward of 24. And then you'd fit wards of 24s to make, wasn't quite 125, but near enough. And we could use those modules. And this basically made the planning much easier because everything from resourcing, nursing, storage, etc., was all a multiple of this 6-bed bay. So on the Monday morning, we handed over this concept design to the appointed design team and then helped by holding a large initial design tour. And it was my ability to just stand and brief large audiences that really helped the day sort of set the scene rather than my technical advice. And it really helped sort of show the vision that the NHS team required. And I was able to introduce the right stakeholders to each other as well. So for the remainder of the construction, I kind of stepped back into a role more of the client's representative. And my main task was to identify areas which needed military support. So we had the Gurkha signal soldiers supporting, they were helping the medical gas installers moving hundreds of meters of copper piping, and they fully equipped all the wards with all the equipment, covering about 25 to 40 kilometers a day walking up and down. We also had some Royal Engineer tradesmen who were required to come and complete some of the plumbing installation. Again, that was a great opportunity for them to practice their trade and also to help keep the project on track. And we were reinforced with some of the majors from Staff College, and they partnered up with the NHS team with planning, coordination and project management alongside some of the contractors. So again, I found it was more my abilities as a planner and a leader that added more value to the team. And I think the ability to just break down the work into much smaller manageable chunks for each team to then go and deal with within their subject matter expertise that certainly helped the project move along so quickly. So it was just over 2 weeks since we set foot into the NEC. On Friday, the 10th of April, we saw most of the military contingent depart who were involved in the construction. And we all then continued on with support to some of the other UK resilience tasks. Some of my team were involved in designing the mobile testing units and the siting of the mega laboratories for the testing. And that was all in addition to our normal role as physical security designers for our operational overseas estate. So it was certainly a great pleasure to work with the NHS and contractors. I was extremely impressed with their rapid design ability and just their pragmatic management of the task. We were all striving for a common goal of getting the hospital open on time, and it was a real sort of feel like DIY SOS, which is brilliant to have in such a difficult time. And on opening, as you can see from the pictures, it looked like a real hospital. It was almost like we'd open it up as a film set for casualty. And I think should it have been required to be used, the people of the Midlands would certainly be in safe hands. So hopefully that's given you a very quick overview of some of the great opportunities that I've had in engineering whilst I've been in the army. And I also hope that it'll inspire some of the younger listeners to look at a career in a STEM field or just military field itself. It's certainly been excellent to work in. And I think I've now given ourselves enough time for questions.
Indeed, and thank you so much, Angela. That was really inspiring and some amazing stuff you've done. There's all sorts of comments coming in the chat from ex-Welbexians and people who've got relatives in the military, and much commentary. So please do feel free to dip into that. But we've had some particular questions through, and some have been voted to the top. And so there was one that came in from Vince, and he said, "You've had a very exciting and challenging career, Angela. If you were to speak to your younger self, say in your school days, what one piece of advice would you give that has been a lesson learnt in your career so far?"
So I certainly think the one is to don't always take what everyone says as gospel, basically. Because if I'd listened to some of those people early on when I was that young army cadet, and they turned around and said, "Oh, I wouldn't get your hopes up. I don't think you'll get into Welbeck." My life would have been totally different. So I think there is that element of take people's advice, but also take it with a pinch of salt. And if you think you may sort of switch that, and like I said, it added fuel to the fire for me to sort of escape the normal, which was go to school, get a job, stay where I'm from in Bedford. So there's certainly that. And then I think from the career point of view, certainly follow the advice of those with the experience. So as a technical engineer, I've got the academic side of things, but not so much the practical experience. So I think the more you can chat to and understand the practicalities of things, I think the better engineer you'll become.
Fantastic. And there's a deal of love and hilarity at your engineering guesstimate that you referred to. So that definitely struck a chord. A question from Rusty. So thanks for the fascinating talk. Much love for that. But what's the next big step for you as an engineer?
So at the moment, I'm working as a technical infrastructure support in a cell in Army headquarters. So we're looking at technical infrastructure that will be on the defence built estate. So I'm looking at sustainability, near zero energy buildings, and things like that. So I've only been in the role for 3 weeks now, and it's already like learning a new language in terms of sustainability, net zero carbon, and things like that. And in terms of sort of professionally, over the next few years, I'll hopefully be promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. One day, I do wonder if I might do a PhD in something to do with infrastructure and engineering, because I do find learning fascinating. And yeah, just keeping sort of this side of things going. I've suddenly realised that doing things like this will hopefully inspire some of the younger generation. So I've just popped into a local school and helped out with Year 6 D-Day engineering and things like that. So hopefully go more into the promoting it for some of the younger generation.
Fantastic. Music to my ears. The more amazing role models we get, the better. I think there's time just for one final question, but there are some more in the chat if you want to go in and answer them yourself. But again, thank you for the great presentation. And this is from Samida. She says, "You are an inspiration to all of us." But one question that she has is, how do you find working on the front line, and how did you cope with those challenges that you faced?
So you do so much training. Once you get there, most of the training was more difficult. We went out to Jordan. We were doing loads of training on ranges and things like that. So I think the train hard, fight easy is certainly a good way to go. And again, I'm really into adventurous training. So one of the pictures that other side which is hiding my wood chip wallpaper, is actually in the Himalayas. So one of the challenges, obviously, things like going to the toilet and stuff like that. But we've practiced that, and I got used to that whilst climbing out in different places. And once everyone gets used to it, it's just not an issue whatsoever. So I think just the whole train hard, fight easy, and I think that's probably the best way to go, and practice things and just chat to people about stuff. It's probably my best bit of advice for that one.
Smashing. Well, thank you so much, Angela. It's been fantastic having you come to talk with us and share your experiences, and so vital with your work, not only on the Nightingale Hospital, but all your previous work as well. And I wish you the very best in your career, because there's clearly a great career path ahead of you. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye. And now we turn on to our international perspective on serving society. And we're very fortunate to be joined by Fadeelah Kenny, who is the Principal Professional Officer for the City of Cape Town Municipality. Fadeelah is an electrical engineer who specialises in medium and low voltage networks and enables connection of embedded generation into the utility grid. So hopefully Fadeelah's with us and she can turn on her microphone and camera. There we go, fantastic. Lovely for you to join us. Thank you so much. And as before, please do post any questions for Fadeelah into the chat, and I'll field the most popular to her at the end. So thanks so much, Fadeelah. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Dawn. If you could put up my slides, please. Otherwise, I can do it from my side as well. Awesome.
Great, we can see that. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. And good day to everyone around the world. I'm very excited to be able to speak to you today. And I'll be speaking to you about a bit about my career as an electrical engineer. It's certainly not a traditional female role, but this is changing. So no young girl that has an analytical and inquiring mind should ever be discouraged from exploring a career in engineering or in STEM for that matter. And an engineer's work is constantly evolving. It's never boring. Day to day, we deal with new challenges, disruptions. One solution causes another problem. So we problem solvers. So I was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa. I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, but I may be biased. I studied electrical engineering for 4 years at the University of Cape Town. That's the campus you can see on the slopes of Devil's Peak over there. And I graduated in 2005. I was lucky enough to be granted a bursary to cover my expenses from Eskom. That's the electricity utility of South Africa. So without that, my parents wouldn't have been able to put me through university. So thank you to Eskom. This is graduation day, and typically the percentage of females compared to males within the engineering stream is not as high as it should be or could be, particularly for electrical and civil engineering. So it was nice to hear from a civil engineer from Major Angela. And in engineering qualification doesn't teach you what you need to know to be great at your job. What it does teach you, though, is how to think. So during your engineering training years is where you really start becoming an engineer. So one of my favorite math lecturers once commented while we were contemplating a particularly juicy integration problem that we'll never actually use this in our jobs. So we were like, what? So why are we breaking our heads learning these things? But he was right, of course. Not once in my 16 years so far, have I ever needed to integrate anything as mildly as complex as that. That's what computers are for. But what it does ensure is that you develop, every single graduate will develop the capacity and the critical thinking ability to take a messy, real world, complex problem, break it down, simplify it, and come up with the best possible solution in the real world. And that is always within the constraints of time, cost, and quality. So then I joined Eskom as an engineer in training with Eskom Distribution. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to spend a year on rotation. So you get to explore various sections within the company and you get a feel for how things fit together and where you would like to see yourself. And this is me wiring up a street lamp in the workshop. There's 278 of them, and the city of Cape Town is one of those municipalities. So Eskom produces most of the power in the country, 95% of it, and 45% of the power within Africa. Unfortunately, most of Eskom's generating technology is still made up of coal, so about 75%, but that is changing slowly. My first permanent appointment was as a telecoms project engineer, where most of my interest was in fiber optic cables. And this is a few pictures of a site visit where I was looking for this fiber optic joint box that you see attached to the pole. And I had to cross this rather muddy river, and I was rather ill prepared, as you can see at the end of it. So we pioneered the installation of fiber optic cables on each and every overhead line and on our main underground cable networks. So now the world is becoming very heavily data dependent, and this seems like a no-brainer. But 20 years ago, this wasn't the case. Our communications requirements were much lower, and our bandwidth capabilities was also much lower. So we could get away with analog power line carriers and radio networks. But fiber, on the other hand, removes this limitations, and a single fiber optic core, you can see a bundle of 96 of them here. So one of these is about the width of a human hair, and it can carry gigabits of data. Okay, so after 5 years, I succeeded my manager and I became the telecoms contracts manager. I was then responsible for managing contracts between the Eskom Telecoms division, who ran the dedicated networks, and the Eskom distribution network for our province. So what you see here is a map of South Africa, and the Cape Town is on the southwest corner over here. And the backbone telecoms networks that's dedicated to the power grid. So it's mostly made up of microwave and fiber optic links. So because of the liability required to operate a power network, the utility has a dedicated division or a division dedicated to telecoms as well as dedicated networks. And I was the interface between these two separate entities. And over here you can see a microwave tower, and this is how the telecoms cabinet would look inside the substation. So the uses of these links are for things like SCADA visibility, so that we can switch the power network remotely, so that we can do control during periods of load shedding or rolling blackouts. Unfortunately, we have too many of these in South Africa. And then for telephony and teleprotection and remote data retrieval and so forth. So roundabout at this time, I registered as a professional engineer with the Engineering Council of South Africa. That is our national registration body. So in order to do certain types of work, you need to be registered as a professional engineer or technologist or technician and so forth. And that allows you to perform certain functions and to be recognized internationally as well. So my advice to young engineers is, at the start of your career, for the first 3 to 5 years, I'd say, get your hands dirty as possible, as often as possible. As you become more skilled and specialized, you quickly get promoted up the ranks, where you start overseeing people and you start operating at a higher level. And often you can't, or you choose not to see the wood for the trees. So make use of your early days to do what you enjoy doing in the field specifically. So by 2016, after 5 years in that position, I felt I needed to get uncomfortable again, because your brain is like a muscle. So either you use it or you lose it. So after 12 years, I decided to go back to UCT, and I completed my master's in nuclear power engineering. And as if that wasn't hard enough, halfway through that, I changed jobs and I started my current position at the City of Cape Town Municipality. And this was all part-time. So it was, doing missing work to attend class and doing everything at night, that type of thing. So throughout your career, if studying is your thing, and if there is something that interests you, grab the opportunity when you are young, because the older you become, the harder it becomes to break away. Life gets in the way. Juggling responsibilities becomes harder. So if you have the opportunity, go for it. So this is a very simple representation of a pressurized water reactor, a nuclear power plant. And this is the containment building. So over here, you can see the Koeberg nuclear power plant. So Koeberg is the only nuclear power generation plant in Africa at the moment. Its installed capacity is 1,940 megawatts, which is made up of two 970 megawatt units. So you can see the two containment buildings over there, those cylindrical structures. And this is me inside one of the two buildings during an outage. So I was lucky enough to be able to spend a few weeks there during a planned outage. And that red tape is holding down my dosimeter device. So when you go in, you are given a a budgeted radiation dose for the specific job that you are planning to do. You don't just go in there willy-nilly. And that records your dose as you move through the plant, and you're not allowed to exceed that. If you do happen to exceed it, you have to exit immediately, whether your job is done or not. Within a nuclear facility, safety is always key. Human safety goes above power generation always. So Kubik ranks amongst the safest of the world's pressurized water reactors in its class, and it's also the most reliable power station within the Eskom fleet at the moment. So currently I'm at the City of Cape Town Municipality. This is my team standing actually in front of the nuclear. You can see Kubik peeking through between our heads. I manage a branch of the Service Connection Planning Department. We enable electrical connections for new developments, houses, industrial and commercial customers at the medium voltage and the low voltage levels. We also assist customers to register their small-scale embedded generation systems. For example, we allow them to connect their home solar PV to the grid. And everything is done while ensuring that the installations meet legal and statutory requirements. So the City of Cape Town metropolitan area has a population of 4.7 million, and we service all of them with municipal services, and one of those services is electricity. So disruptions within the electricity sector, as well as disruptions in technologies. I mentioned load shedding. So Eskom's power generation capacity is not enough to always supply the country. So we experience load shedding or rolling blackouts, as well as the effects of climate change has caused that the city needs to reposition itself in the energy landscape. So in line with that, we encourage the installation of private small-scale embedded generation systems known as SSCG, particularly rooftop photovoltaic, like you can see in the slide over here, into homes or buildings. And anything up to 1 megawatt is considered small-scale embedded generation. So over here, you can see a grid-tied SSEG system. All systems can be broadly classified into 3 types. It's either grid-tied, off-grid, or hybrid, which is a mixture or a hybrid of both. So all SSEG systems are required to be registered with the city before they can be installed or generate in the case of off-grid systems. So the grid-tied PV systems have PV panels that you can see on the roof there. That's connected directly to an inverter. The panels produce DC and the inverter converts to AC. The electricity that it's generated is then used locally on the property, or if there's excess, it is fed back into the grid, as you can see over here. So when the solar system generates more electricity than your building uses, then the excess goes back into the grid, and the city will credit you at a fixed rate if you elect to partake in the SSEG tariff. So it's a requirement that only inverters with anti-islanding capabilities are used or are approved for use within the city. And that means that if your power, if you lose your connection to the grid for any reason, your solar system also needs to switch off. Here's an example of an off-grid system. If you look closely, you can see 2 separate systems. The grid coming in here to the oven and then separately the solar PV system on the side. So in an off-grid system, the PV's electricity circuit is completely separated from any wiring connected to the electricity grid. And that also means that the system relies on batteries during periods of low sunlight or at night. The city keeps a register of SSCG systems that have applied for authorization. And here you can see the uptake of approved grid-tied, commissioned embedded generation systems on a monthly basis. This graph happens to go from 2014, but we have been doing it since about 2007 up to today. So we have just about 1,600 systems, and that together has a combined capacity of about 57 A. Just to put that into perspective, a typical house with an 80 amp supply has a supply of 18.4 kVA. This is our complete database of installations that's within the system. So these are currently, they didn't form part of the 1.6 because they happen to still be in the process of being registered. And that is a little bit about me and what I do as a female electrical engineer. So when I received this invite to speak, to inspire other women to similarly become heroes in their field, my knee-jerk reaction was, no, that's not me. I'm too busy. I don't like public speaking. I'm not impactful enough. Someone else can do it better. But on second thought, I realized that these feelings are a manifestation of imposter syndrome. What is imposter syndrome? It is a feeling of inadequacy felt by accomplished individuals. No matter how big the achievements or how successful they become, they always feel as if they're about to be found out, that they are a fraud, an imposter, that they don't belong at the table or in their job. So it is more keenly felt by women and other minority groups. So Sheryl Sandberg, she is the current COO of Facebook and the author of Lean In. I highly recommend this book. She says that if you ask a man to explain his success, he will typically credit his own innate qualities and skills, whereas women tend to have lower self-esteem. So they'll attribute any success they've achieved to external factors, like I worked very hard, or I got lucky, or I had help from others. So Sheryl herself has experienced imposter syndrome throughout her career. And in Lean In, she writes that every time she excelled, she believed that she had fooled everyone yet again. And that one day soon, the jig would be up. Even Albert Einstein was a victim of imposter syndrome. He thought of himself as an involuntary swindler. Hard to believe. Yeah. So I swallowed my fear and I said yes. Because if I can inspire one person that has been told that they're not good enough to overcome their fears and chase their dreams, then my job here is done. So, change slides. So if you can relate to these feelings of self-doubt, realize that they are entirely normal, and acknowledging the issue is the start of overcoming your own self-limiting beliefs. There are a few things that I'd like to share with you that you can use to overcome imposter syndrome. So firstly, recognizing that it is a problem. Then embracing criticism. Take it as feedback and take some time if you need to, but then come back to it and use it as an opportunity to improve. Get a mentor. A mentor is typically someone that you don't report to, but that you have access to and that you admire in your field. So a mentor can help you realize what you're doing well and also where you can improve. And very importantly, it allows you to be able to compare yourself to yourself and not necessarily to others. You can also get a coach, such as a life coach, and this person can help you deal with the root cause of the issue, which can often stem from childhood or very early in life when someone told you're not good enough. Also, give yourself positive self-talk. So make a list of all the negative things you tell yourself, and for each one, identify something positive, which is the opposite of that negative thing. It is possible. Dr. John DeMartini teaches that you can only recognize a trait in others to the degree that it's present in yourself. You just need to look hard enough within yourself. And with that, I want to leave you with my final comments. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're right. And sometimes it's okay to figure things out as you go along. But the hardest part is just to start. Thank you very much. So I think we can go to questions now.
Thanks so much, Fadeelah, and you absolutely are inspirational. And thank you so much for leaning in and accepting our request to talk about your career to date. It's been great. That there have been lots of praise coming in through the chat for you, and some questions. I'll group some of them together because some are similar. So both Karina and Pamela want to know about the most feasible alternatives to coal, and that they mentioned about the solar panels and so on that you mentioned. So particularly in South Africa, what do you think the most feasible alternative is to coal?
Okay, so there isn't just one answer to that question. The answer is an energy mix, because if you look at the properties of the different energy technologies, they all serve a different sector of your load curve. So you need your base stations such as big stuff like nuclear, coal, that sort of thing that runs 24/7 unless something goes wrong. You know, they're constantly running. That is your base load. But then you also need your smaller stuff that can be switched on and off to run your peaks, because you have a daily peak where, as everyone wakes up, you know, the demand curve goes up quite drastically, and then the evening peak as well. So there you can come in with your smaller wind generating or your pump storage, which you can switch on and off in a few minutes. I'm a fan of nuclear, clearly. I studied it. And I really think that it is a good solution for South Africa and for the world. It is a clean technology, and there are some issues with the storage of the waste, for example, which I acknowledge. But other than that, it is a great alternative to coal. So on the big scale, I love nuclear, but the renewables also have a place. So yes, an energy mix is my answer.
And thinking about nuclear, Laura had an interesting question, which was that there's quite a lot of public misconception and concern about nuclear. How do you cope with that? How are you able to sort of field those questions and those worries and challenges?
Yes, that is a very big problem. So within South Africa, we have a nuclear board that has actually been stumped by public perception of nuclear. And I think if there is a lot more education to I think the younger generation, they're going to be the answer. Educate the school kids and the up and coming youngsters about nuclear, about its possibilities and about its problems as well. And I think that's the answer.
Okay. And thinking about the children, particularly in education for girls in South Africa in particular, are STEM subjects popular for girls? Is it getting better or worse, do you think, wherever you are? Geraldine would like to know.
Within my short lifetime, STEM has definitely been increasing for young girls. There's definitely a lot more awareness that it is a requirement to especially push and encourage for girls to be able to go into STEM, because it is not always seen as a natural career path. We as girls make excellent engineers, so we want and we need more of them.
Couldn't agree more. And Rossi says, thank you so much for an interesting and technically inspired talk. She feels that having people championing their peers is really encouraging to keeping women into engineering. And she wonders, you talked about having a mentor. Did you yourself have a mentor to support you in your career path?
Yes, I did. I must admit that currently I don't have one, but I have had more than one mentor in the past that has helped me a lot. One of my previous mentors is actually now my peer, but I've used them. I've used them to make certain breakthroughs within my career when I felt stuck. So highly recommend get yourself a mentor.
Perfect. And we'll finish up with quite a specific and technical question due to your geography. Says Fadeelah, this is from Kirsten. Thank you for sharing your experience and local knowledge. How bad is the load shedding issue at the moment in terms of being able to provide the city with reliable supply, and what change is realistic in the next 5 or 10 years?
Okay, so Eskom is our local supply authority, and unfortunately, they have an aging power infrastructure. What is in the pipeline in South Africa is to actually we want to enable independent power producers to start selling electricity, because at the moment they can generate and they can sell to Eskom. Eskom is the monopoly. No one else can sell the electricity. There is legislation that's being written to enable to change that, so that we would have what we call the unbundling of Eskom, so that we'll have generation operating separately and competing with other private companies that may be able to come in and get us electricity at the same or cheaper rate than Eskom. That is what should be happening within the next 5 years or so, and I hope that that will bring in competition, it will bring in international interest in our country, so that we can fix this power shortage that we have. So at the moment, we are now going through winter, and we've had load shedding for the past maybe 2-3 weeks on and off. We've maybe been switched off for 2 hours at a time, maybe twice a week. And I just commented to my husband this morning, I hope that load shedding doesn't strike while I'm busy presenting, because then it's going to be an added stress. So luckily Eskom behaved. Thank you.
No, thank you. And
yes.
we're so delighted that you could join us. There are a few more questions in the chat. So if you were able to go in and answer them, that would be fantastic, because there are some very specific questions and they clearly found you hugely inspirational. So thank you so much for joining us from all the way in South Africa. That's the great thing about these virtual conferences, that we can get this international expertise. It's brilliant. So please enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much indeed for joining us, Fadeelah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and bye everyone.
Bye. And now we come on to the awards part of the event. So hopefully I've got our CEO Elizabeth to join me. Elizabeth, are you with us? Hopefully she should pop up to be able to announce the winners.
Turn on.
Oh, I can hear something. I think you're on the way in. I could hear a static echo. There we go. Yeah. Fantastic. So I shall hand over to Elizabeth and leave you in her capable hands to announce the very exciting winners of this year's WE50.
Thank you very much, Dawn. And wow, what a brilliant couple of speakers with Major Laycock and Fadeelah there. I'm just so...
You're sounding a bit Daleki, I'm afraid.
Ah. Hang on a sec. Let me try and turn off my mic and camera, and then I'll try again. How is that? Is that a lot better?
Much better, thank you.
Excellent. So we're now at the award ceremony part of the Women's Engineering Society INWED celebration. And today we are going to be announcing the top 50 women in engineering, our engineering heroes. And this has been absolutely fantastic and I've really, really enjoyed it. So I'm very delighted to begin the presentation. Dr. Tayeba Ameri. Do feel free to clap and say well done in the chat. Samida Anand. Phoebe Baker. Dr. Claire Bennett. Dr. Grace Campbell. Jackie Carpenter. Dame Jo De Silva. Georgia Davey. Claire Dewhurst. Dr. Karen Donaldson. Professor Hua Dong. Dr. Catherine Dunn. Dr. Natalia Falagan. Professor Eleanor Gower. Kate Grant. Catherine Grigg. Joe Hartnell. Millie Henniake. Jean Hewitt. Debbie Jansen. Dr. Sahani Khan Narayan. Emma Kent. Dr. Suk Kinch. Hannah Leeson. Dr. Kristen McCaskill. Caitlin McCall. Linda McVitie. Dr. Helen Meese. Susanna Neves Brooks. Mimi Nwosu. Jennifer Olson. Polly Osborne. Dr. Christiana Pace. Dr. Tanaz Pak. Sergeant Sarah Partington. Kelly Paul. Kaisha Payne. Andrea Pearson. Professor Alison Raby. Catherine Rennie. Professor Jane Rickson. Dr. Deepa Roy. Jyoti Sadev. Ira Shah. Professor Rebecca Shipley. Dr. Maria Sunya Pina. Dr. Larissa Suzuki. Sue Thredder. Hannah Vickers. And last but definitely not least, Julie Wood. Congratulations to the 2021 Top 50 Women in Engineering. You can find more details of their achievements on the Guardian website today. I'll put the link in the chat for you, and also on our website at wes.org.uk/we50. Congratulations, everyone. I think we're now going to a screen break. I think everyone can now take a few minutes to have a rest, stretch your legs, have something to eat, and we'll see you back here very shortly. Well, welcome back from our screen break, and I hope you've all enjoying the webinar so far. It's now my very great pleasure to introduce Helen Close, who is the WES Heritage Officer, and she is going to talk to us more about discovering engineering heroes. Over to you, Helen. I can't hear you, I'm afraid, Helen. No, I'm sorry.
How about now?
That's a lot better, yes, thank you.
Right, sorry about that. Right, okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. The WES Centenary Project, which ran between 2018 and 2021 and was funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, helped us to celebrate our 100th anniversary in 2019. The project had built on previous research and uncovered many of the amazing stories of many historical WES women. Many of these women have entries now on Wikipedia when they were previously unheard of. Those entries now populate our Centenary Trail map, which now has 434 women engineers on it. If you haven't seen it already, I suggest you take a look. It shows where women engineers and WES members of significance were born, and it has further expanded worldwide. We know from our research that many of these female engineers had support from companies specifically set up to train and employ women. And there's some photographs there from our archives and various other archives that we've uncovered of some of those women engineers. Companies such as Atalanta in Loughborough, Metro Vickers in Manchester, the Galway Engineering Company in Scotland, Holmes and Leather Limited in Kent, and Arinex in Northamptonshire. Several of these companies were set up by WES members. They were founded by women who, quote, seeing no scope for their activities and having the natural road of success barred to them, decided to risk their all and to establish engineering works where there will be absolute freedom for them to use the ability and skill which they possess. Women were involved in all types of engineering, making cars, aeroplanes and bombs, as well as teapots and paper cutters. But we know there are many more women engineers hiding there in the background. Their stories have been hidden or hijacked, and we have to go back to grassroots level to find them, but they are there. If you yourself are interested in carrying out research and don't know where to start, here are a few ideas. There are journals, including the Woman Engineer and the Electrical Age, and even periodicals such as the Housewife magazine give accounts of extraordinary and inspirational women of the day. Census data on ancestry.co.uk, patent records, biographies and autobiographies, archive papers, newspaper archives, even local histories in your museums, and also company archives. The Woman Engineer Journal, which has been published by WES since 1919, is now available digitally on the Institute of Engineering and Technology website. This was our primary source and starting point for our research for the Centenary Project, giving us a great amount of detail of WES members and other past women engineers who have disappeared from history. It is also a great historical record in itself. But we want to make sure that the more recent women engineers and future engineers aren't lost from the pages of time. We want to make sure that they don't have to be uncovered by future generations. So what WES is asking from you is what we would like to know for attendees of the conference. Were you the first woman engineer in your organisation, or do you know someone who was? And we've heard from Major Laycock this morning, and she was the first woman engineer to be admitted to, I think it was the university. And what is your story, or what is their story? And for WES partner organisations, we know that many of our partners have long histories and have their own archives and archive services. But how long ago did you employ your first woman engineer? Who was she? And was it celebrated at the time? Or if you want to carry out research on your favourite female engineer and write a blog or a Wikipedia entry for her, then please share that information with us. If you'd like to make sure your story is heard by future generations, or that your company's story in supporting women engineers is told, then please contact me at heritage@wes.org.uk. And if you'd like to explore the map and the pins on the map, then the web link is there. Thank you. Over to Dawn.
Thank you so much, Helen. And it's going to be amazing to get some more stories uncovered for fantastic women engineers. And talking of stories of women engineers, there is no better story to tell than that of Amy Johnson. And I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Jane Priston, who is the founder and director of the Amy Johnson Project, with the objective of bridging the gap between aviation and engineering history and bringing to life for the next generation the fantastic story that is Amy Johnson. She has a wealth of success in this area in bringing this to life and has really brought out the history of one of WES's amazing past presidents, and everybody can enjoy it. So please, if you're there, Jane, turn on your mic and camera, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation about Amy's life. There you are.
Can you hear me?
I can. You're a little fuzzy, so try again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can. It's still a bit fuzzy. Let me go off screen, see if it's me taking up bandwidth. Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay?
It is still a little disrupted.
Okay. Any suggestions?
That was better. That was better there.
Maybe I shan't move. Okay, let me know if there's any problems. Otherwise, I'll assume everybody can hear me and I'll carry on. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to speak about Amy Johnson to mark the 2021 International Women in Engineering Day. I'm going to gallop through Amy's life and then talk about what makes Amy an engineering hero. So yes, the slides are working. That's always a good sign. This wonderful picture of Amy, she was born on the 1st of July 1903 in Hull. She was the eldest of 4 sisters, and Amy's father, Will Johnson, ran a successful fish import-export business. Amy on the top right here, in her teenage years, was a tomboy. She had an obsession with sport, the more dangerous the better. And she was well known for leading many a strike and rebellion during her teenage years. She went to Sheffield University to study economics and graduated in 1925, where she then embarked on a couple of office jobs, which she didn't enjoy at all. She was very restless and couldn't quite settle. And in 1927, Amy was in a relationship with an older man. And it was causing problems with her parents. So her father sat her down and gave her an ultimatum to end the relationship or leave the family home. And you won't be surprised to hear that Amy promptly left for London to seek adventure and freedom. She was joined in London, before that, when she got to London, she did manage to secure a secretarial role with a firm of solicitors called William Crocker Solicitors. And this really is where Amy's life took off. She was joined in London by Winifred Irving here, who was one of her university friends. And they shared a variety of lodgings while they were there. And one in particular was a turning point for Amy. It was a property in Maida Vale near Stag Lane, the aerodrome. And Amy was captivated watching the planes and longed for the freedom and adventure that she felt they represented. So one Saturday, Amy jumped on a bus heading for Stag Lane. And as she got closer, the planes were coming so low, they almost seemed to be landing on top of her head. And in Amy's words herself, she says, "Wild with excitement, I jumped off the bus and ran up Stag Lane. This was the most important milestone in my life. It was the turning point, the beginning of part 2. Amy was very bored with office life and decided she wanted to learn to fly. She had her first flying lesson at Stag Lane on the 15th of September 1928. It did not go well. Her instructor told her she would never make a pilot. But she was determined, and despite a bad winter, she eventually went solo on the 9th of July 1929 after 15 hours and 45 minutes tuition. Now, Amy's flying skill was certainly not innate or instinctive. It was very much learned, and she struggled particularly with landings and was affectionately known as an arriver rather than a lander. And she was also very curious about how planes worked. But when she asked her instructors, they just fobbed her off. So she turned her attention to the engineering sheds, the world of the grease boys, where the women were banned. And you won't be surprised to hear this didn't put Amy off. In fact, it probably spurred her on. And at this point, she met somebody very significant in her life. This gentleman here is Jack Humphreys. He was the chief engineer at Stag Lane Aerodrome. And she turned her attention on befriending Jack. She was so interested in learning how to engineer an aircraft, and her persistence won him over. He realized she was simply not going to go away. So he agreed to become her mentor. She had platinum blonde hair at this point, and the grease boys rejected her. It wasn't an easy start, but she just cracked on, proved herself, and she was eventually accepted by the lads as one of the lads, and affectionately known as Johnny. Now, interestingly, Jack Humphreys says of Amy, when she came to Stag Lane, I knew she was a born engineer. She came to the workshops and did every blessed thing. For 9 months, she did nothing but pull down engines and build them up. Then she learned to remove tails and wings and reassemble machines. Most flying men do not know why a machine flies, but Miss Johnson knows all right. That girl will break records. She got her pilot's license on the 6th of July, 1929, and she was very bored with office work and decided she wanted a career in aviation. But unfortunately, at this point received a life-changing blow when her younger sister here, Irene, unexpectedly committed suicide. Amy was devastated and was said to be furious with life, but also it probably fueled her in terms of pursuing her dreams and chasing the life that she wanted rather than the life she was supposed to have. With her father's support, Amy left Crocker's solicitors to pursue a career in aviation, and she threw herself into flying and engineering. She faced violent anti-feminist prejudice, without a doubt. But on the 10th of December 1929, she became the first British female ground engineer, and at one point was the only one in the world. On the 8th of January 1930, a reporter came to Stag Lane Aerodrome seeking a story, and Amy boldly announced she was going to fly solo to Australia. The reporter ran the story, so Amy had to deliver on her bold announcement. She had no money and no plane. She entered into an intense period of planning and letter writing, sometimes 12 to 15 a day. There were meetings, but she struggled massively to be taken seriously, and she was getting pretty desperate. And she had a breakthrough when Sir Sefton Branca, who was the director of civil aviation at the time, believed in Amy. He saw something in her and introduced her to Lord Wakefield, who was the patron saint of aviation and the head of the company that produced Castro oil. And he agreed to back her, and things started to actually happen. This was in April 1930. Her planned takeoff date was the 5th of May. So 2 weeks before that takeoff, she bought a second-hand Gypsy Moth biplane. It was paid for by her father and Lord Wakefield. She painted it green, which was her lucky colour, and silver, and named it Jason, which was the registered trademark for her father's fish company, and a tribute to her family's constant support. This point, there was frantic plans. Once again, it was a very tight deadline, buying maps, sorting out the route, which pretty much was a ruler from England to Australia. She was trying to beat Bert Hinkler's speed record of 15.5 days. So on the 5th of May, 1930, at Croydon Airport, there was a report of fog over the channel, which would normally mean no flying. Amy's response to that was, fog doesn't worry me. I don't want to see the channel anyway. Nothing was going to stop her. When she took off for Australia at 7:45 that morning, the furthest she'd flown was from London to Hull, and she'd had her pilot's license for 10 months. She was flying a wood and fabric open cockpit aircraft 11,000 miles alone, and she was just 26 years old. She had neither the skills or the experience to survive the trip, but she had tenacious determination, resilience, stamina, bravery or reckless naivety, but incredible self-belief. Amy really believed that she would make it. She had no long-range weather information and only the most basic of maps. She flew over uncharted land, shark-infested sea, in blistering sun, torrential rain and sandstorms. She would fly on average 10 hours a day and then sometimes spend up to 3 hours overhauling her engine before grabbing something to eat and a bit of sleep and then doing it all over again. The flight pushed her to the very limits, both physically and mentally. It's not an exaggeration to say that Amy crashed her way to Australia, battling severe exhaustion. And Amy's courage captured the imagination of the world. She refused to give up, even when she knew that she couldn't beat the speed record. 19 and a half days after taking off from England, a battered, blistered and sunburnt Amy Johnson arrived in Darwin, Australia, and flew into the history books. She hadn't broke the speed record, but she'd set the record for being the first woman to fly solo from England to Australia. She left Croydon, a 26-year-old typist from Hull, and landed an international celebrity and heroine. She was thrown into a 6-week tour of Australia, which she was not prepared for or fit for, at one point giving 47 speeches in 4 days. She had no time to digest her triumph or recover physically or emotionally. And Amy was mobbed wherever she went, but the exhaustion was taking its toll and she often had to be physically held up while she was waving to the crowds. She was awarded a CBE in June of 1930, and her fame grew. I think the masses could just identify with she was just Amy or Johnny, and she was an ordinary girl that had done an extraordinary thing. She arrived back in the UK in August of 1930. 200,000 people were at Croydon Airport to see her land. It was a roaring reception. Now, Amy was given gifts of planes and cars. She had songs and poems written about her. And the world were obsessed with her. And at the height of her fame, it's a credit to her that she used this opportunity and her voice to make a point. During a broadcast, she says, "I'm afraid my flight has received far more than its due in publicity. I admit I'm a woman and the first to do it. But in the future, I do not want it to be unusual that women should do things. I want it to be recognised that women can do them. I didn't jump into an aeroplane at Croydon and say, cheerio, I'm off, with no preparations at all. I worked jolly hard first. People often ask me if I think that many women have engineering minds. I do not at present, but I do believe that everyone can adapt themselves to do anything." Amy went on to spend the 1930s breaking more aviation records and promoting women in aviation and engineering. In 1932, she married fellow pilot Jim Mollison, and they became the flying sweethearts. They courted the media and lived the celebrity lifestyle and were quite competitive with each other as pilots too. And Jim very much groomed Amy, the dishevelled, grease-ridden engineer, into this sophisticated, iconic John Capstack image with the captivating eyes. But behind the camera, it was not a happy marriage. Jim was drinking and womanizing, and rows began pretty much straight away. In 1932, Amy beat Jim's record for a flight from England to Cape Town. And in 1933, they flew together, the Atlantic, east to west, unfortunately crash landing 50 miles short of New York, but they received a ticker tape reception, although both of them was quite injured. This is a picture of them with President Roosevelt and his wife Eleanor, and of course, to Jim's left, the other aviatrix of the era, Amelia Earhart. Amy loved America, and America loved Amy, and you can see this fantastic picture of her and Amelia Earhart that wouldn't look out of place today. Amy returned to the UK in 1934 for the McRobertson Air Race, which she entered with Jim. They had bought a brand new de Havilland Comet Racer, which they called Black Magic. Unfortunately, they had to retire from the race, but they still managed to set a record for their flight to India. And in 1934, Amy became president of the Women's Engineering Society and remained so for 3 years. She was a very active president, doing many speeches and writing articles. In 1935, Amy's marriage had already broken down, and she spent much of her time alone. It was a desperate time for her, trying to make a living. She wanted to be taken seriously as a pilot and was struggling quite badly. But in 1936, although the record-breaking flights and the demand for them were beginning to dwindle, Amy made a comeback when she flew solo from England to Cape Town and back and broke 3 records. It was her last record-breaking flight, but she regained her credibility as a pilot and was awarded the Royal Aero Club's Gold Medal, which meant the world to her. In 1937, Amy returned to America, honing her navigational skills, and she made the decision here that she wouldn't take on any more long-distance flights, and this decision just preceded the loss of her friend Amelia Earhart. She turned her back on powered flight and got her kicks of speed and adventure from racing cars, riding horses, and gliding. In 1938, Amy divorced Jim. To the public, she remained glamorous and strong, but behind the scenes, she was deeply unhappy and very lonely. In 1939, she published her only book, Sky Roads of the World. It discusses aviation, past, present, and future. She was quite disappointed with it, and by her own admission, it's quite dull. She continued job hunting, facing massive frustrations, as she'd been labelled a stunt pilot because of her record-breaking flying, and she wasn't taken seriously. She eventually found a flying job in 1939 with the Portsmouth, South Sea and Isle of Wight Aviation Company, and then war broke out. In early 1940, the company was requisitioned by the military, and Amy was out of a job again. In May 1940, reluctantly, Amy joined the Air Transport Auxiliary, and this was a civilian organisation attached to the RAF who were responsible for transporting aircraft from the factories where they were built to the airfields where the bomber boys and fighter boys took them into battle, which obviously Amy wasn't allowed to do despite her flying experience because she was a woman. But in the summer of 1940, when the Battle of Britain raged, Amy understood the importance of her role and took pride in her work. But she was still a celebrity and would cause a stir when she landed the aircraft. There were young pilots just in awe of this record-breaking daredevil. But she was said to be very warm and friendly. And interestingly, the ATA was probably the most contented period of Amy's life. She was fiercely patriotic, serving her country, doing what she loved most, and earning a living. But it was dangerous work. Amy had no doubts how she would die. She always said, "I knew where I would finish up. In the drink, a few headlines in the newspapers, and then they forget you." On the 1st of January 1941, Amy wrote to Caroline Hazlitt, president of the Women's Engineering Society, submitting an article. And in this letter, you can see her humility and humour and her dedication to the cause that at the height of war, when she was flying aircraft here, there and everywhere, she still found time to write and submit this article. And she writes to Caroline, "My dear Caroline, enclosed is my effort for the Woman Engineer, which you asked me to write. It's an honour to be asked to contribute to your magazine, and I'm afraid my article isn't anywhere near adequate. My only excuse is that I'm so out of practice. This is the first bit of writing since war started, though I find it extremely difficult to string words together. I'd rather do a week's flying any time. Very many thanks for your card for Christmas. I'm afraid I didn't send any out this year, but I certainly appreciated being remembered by my friends. I hope the gods will watch over you this year, and I wish you all the best of luck, the only useful thing not yet taxed. All the best, yours affectionately, Amy." This was the last letter Amy ever wrote. On the 5th of January 1941, Amy was scheduled to fly an Airspeed Oxford from RAF Squires Gate in Blackpool to Kidlington in Oxfordshire. The weather forecast was poor, visibility was bad, and she was advised not to fly. But Amy said, "I'll go over the top and look for the break in the cloud." Now, the ATA were not allowed to do this, but they were allowed and even encouraged to fly in weather that would normally ground a fighter squadron. So if you look at risk here, what an average pilot might consider to be weather that is not safe to fly, and what you consider what Amy has flown through on her record-breaking flights, I believe Amy wouldn't have taken off unless she felt that she would make it. Most pilots were grounded that day, but at 11:49, Amy took off for Kidlington. She should have reached there in about an hour, and she never arrived. At about 3:30 that day, there was a wartime convoy of 35 vessels in the Thames estuary that witnessed a plane come through the cloud, circle, and then hit the water under some degree of control. This is the HMS Hazelmere. It set full steam ahead to attempt a rescue, but unfortunately ran aground on a sandbank. The conditions were appalling. It was freezing. There was a heavy swell, sleet and snow. There was a pilot in the water that was being brought closer to the vessel. And the pilot said, "Hurry, please hurry." And that's when they realised it was a woman. There were frantic attempts to reach her, throwing ropes over to her. There was one crew member hanging over the side of the boat. They got to within 5 feet of her when, unfortunately, the stern of the ship came crashing down and she disappeared. And it's widely believed that she was probably hit by the propeller of the boat that went to her aid. Now, the gentleman on the left here is the captain of the Hazelmere, Lieutenant Commander Walter Fletcher, who also lost his life on that day. He swam out to what a number of witnesses believed to be a second body. When they finally reached him in the lifeboat, he was unconscious and he died 5 days later of shock and hypothermia. 2 bags were recovered after the incident and they contain the belongings of Amy Johnson. And they are all that remains of that fateful day. This bag is at Sowerby Hall in Bridlington. Her other bag is at Croydon Airport Museum. And Amy's water-stained logbook is at the RAF Museum in Hendon. Amy's body and the wreckage of her plane were never found. She was just 37 years old. On the 14th of January 1941, a memorial service at St Martin's in the Fields, Trafalgar Square, was organised by the Women's Engineering Society, attended by Amy's family, dignitaries, aviators and school friends, and crowds lined the streets. A quote from the Woman Engineer Memorial Edition, which was published in March 1941, says, "Some 40 women's organisations at that service paid tribute to one woman who did so much for all women by being herself, by daring to live to her full capacity, by following her bent. It took 3 years for the proof of death case to come to court, and it proved that that unknown pilot on that day was Amy Johnson." Now, Amy's family made a pact never to speak about her death, but her father spent much time in this room that was dedicated to her memory. And as with many icons who die young, the mystery surrounding the death of Amy Johnson has actually helped to keep her memory alive. On the 5th of January 1941, the world lost a pioneer and one of its greatest ever female aviators and engineering heroes. Her Australia flight remains one of the most outstanding solo achievements of all time. And Amy's engineering skill is widely recognised as being one of the key factors of her success. At the time of her death, she had some 2,560 hours flying experience. When she took off for Australia, she had just 99. She was remarkable. She died tragically during a world war. And I take some comfort in the words of Amy herself. When her friend Amelia Earhart disappeared in 1937, Amy said, "If I fail to find my mid-Pacific island, let no one grieve for me or wish me any other fate. We all must finish our lives sometime, and I infinitely prefer this end to the flu or senile decay. Rather grieve if I never have the chance to try." And I feel that's Amy's way of saying, I know I'm going to go the same way, and that's okay. So what makes Amy Johnson a hero? Well, I'm going to draw on 2 quotes, really, to properly cover this. The first is Sir Francis Shelmerdine, who was the Director General of Civil Aviation in 1937, and then went on to actually found the ATA. He says of Amy's career, "The knowledge and experience gained by these flights form the most important contribution to the work of laying the foundations and the regular services now in operation. In this, as in all other respects, the services to aviation by Miss Amy Johnson may be said to have been equalled by few individuals, and it is a matter of speculation whether, in their cumulative effect, they can have been excelled by anybody, man or woman." And the second quote, once again, comes from the memorial edition of The Woman Engineer, and it says, "We cannot draw up a profit and loss account and state in precise terms how any one life affects others, but the old simile of the pebble dropped in the pool sending out concentric circles that grow larger but less marked can aptly be applied to Amy Johnson. The outer circle has touched the horizon everywhere. Every corner of the world knew her, was inspired by her daring, her courage, her patriotism. The small inner circle enjoyed the strong sense of her spirit, knew by personal experience how truly daring, courageous, patriotic, unselfish she was, and added to admiration, affection. Another circle, our own, very privileged, had many opportunities to prove that lavish praise was never too lavish, that adulation was all deserved, that to the heroic qualities which the world knew, Amy added the homely ones of gaiety, modesty, friendliness. Individually, those who knew her are better for the experience. And the things Amy stood for have not lost her support. She demonstrated for all time that women can plan daring feats, can pay close attention to detail, can superintend and carry out prescribed program, can overcome obstacles as they are encountered, can learn from misfortune, can face disappointment without loss of courage. Myself, I'd just like to say Amy was a pioneer, and she wasn't just a pioneer for aviation and engineering. She was a pioneer for all women to be all that they could be, and she was a pioneer for transforming society itself. She was a maverick and possessed an inner strength that was prepared to challenge attitudes of the day and not be conformed by society. She was and remains truly inspirational. And I'm going to finish with a quote by Amy that was taken from one of her Women's Engineering Society speeches in 1936. Amy says, "Progress in aviation, as in every sphere, is due to the people who believe nothing to be impossible. The course of ease is to say it cannot be done. The skeptics actually do much to further progress. They hold a pistol at the head of the dreamer and the optimist, challenging them to bring their dreams to reality. The answer of progress to it can't be done is hold tight and watch. Progress means always trying to go one better, to get more out of something by trial and error, by crying for the moon, by hitching one's wagon to a star, by never saying die so the world progresses. Individual steps may be too small to matter much, but the sum total, like the ant heap, the honeycomb, the skyscraper or the Queen Mary, is an achievement worthwhile." Amy said, "I know where I shall finish up, in the drink, a few headlines in the newspapers and then they forget you." She could not have been more wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. That is such an amazing story, and kudos to you for putting that all together and uncovering it and bringing it to life for the nation. We've got time for just a quick question, and then if there are any other questions, I'm sure if people post them in the chat, you might be able to pick them up.
Yep.
But really intrigued to understand what's the most fascinating snippet that you uncovered about her life that you really didn't expect to find?
Gosh, that's a really hard one to answer, actually. I think one of the elements which isn't known about Amy is she was really quite she could do things that some people consider to be unexpected and unacceptable if she felt that she needed to, and that's a side to her that not many people know so much about. So one example is, when she married Jim, she didn't tell her parents, so they were getting married. They found out the night before and went ahead without it. And there's a huge speculation about whether she was trying to sort of move away from her humble beginnings from the north of England or not. So yeah, she just had this streak in her, and I do think actually these women, Amelia Earhart, these aviators, these incredible mavericks of their time, there was something different about them that enabled them to live the lives that they live and take the risks that they took. So yeah, it was she had a streak of steel running through her.
And in your amazing trail of putting together the statues and events and presentation, what's next for you? Have you got a couple of pieces lined up?
Yeah, so I'm continuing with the outreach work. I take Amy's story wherever I go, and she's just such an incredible role model for all of us, not just young girls. I have men and women, of all ages captivated with Amy's story. For me, I'm actually pulling the whole thing together and working on a book, which is going to take a little bit of time. It's not so much a biography, but it's sort of tapping into the voice of Amy herself, because she was an incredible writer and speaker. but also cracking on with the research. We're still searching for the wreckage of the plane and the answers to some of the questions surrounding her death. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes with my project.
Well, thank you so much, and no doubt we will hear more when you uncover the next amazing piece of the story.
I hope so.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much indeed for joining us, Jen. Thank you. And moving on to our final speaker for this afternoon, who is Janette Marx, the CEO of Airswift, a global workforce solutions company. Alongside her incredibly impressive executive career, Janette is very involved in community work and serves on no less than 5 not-for-profit boards, as well as being an ambassador for the US Department of Energy. So hopefully Janette's with us, and if I could invite her to turn on her camera and microphone. As previously, whilst Janette's talking, if you have any questions for her, do post them in the chat, because we will be taking some questions afterwards. So thank you. Over to you, Janette.
Thank you so much. I am going to set up my screen right now so everyone can see it. And I think we are live. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Okay, we're up and running. So I am Janette Marx, and I am really excited to be here with you all and talk about the future of engineering, where the future heroes will come. We've heard about the present, we've heard about the past. Where are we going in the future? Now, as you may be able to tell by my voice, I'm American, and I am calling in from Houston, Texas today. So in Houston, we get to do something special quite a bit. We have the benefit of visiting NASA quite frequently. So here's me exploring a replica of the International Space Station and seeing the engineering marvels firsthand as to what our engineers do from around the world to keep the International Space Station up and working always. This is where people from all over the world can come and really learn about our next frontier. Here at Airswift, where I'm the CEO, our mission is really to transform lives through the world of work. We place engineers all over the world into many different industries to really perform at their peak levels. All of you are here today also have the opportunity to transform lives and to become an engineering hero. So I'm going to take you now back to NASA. So we're going to use this as an example to start. When you walk the halls of NASA, every employee speaks of their vision to put a human on Mars by the year 2035. So we're talking about the future now. You could say that sending people to Mars is the next giant leap for mankind. This mission will jumpstart massive developments in all kinds of areas. So why do we want to do this? A few examples can be recycling, solar energy, food production, and even advancement of medical technology and so much more. I think those who observed Neil Armstrong land on the moon all those years ago still remember every detail, where they were, who they were with, and how they felt. The moment the first astronauts land on Mars will be our moment to really remember for the future. Did you know that at this point, someone who's between the ages of 9 to 19 years old will most likely be that first astronaut to land on Mars? So this person is just now learning and growing and seeing the world. And in order to get to Mars, we will need to outfit the spacecraft with astronauts with technologies to get them there safely, to explore the surface, and to safely return home. This is going to take more than an aeronautical engineer. It will also take biomedical, mechanical, electrical, process, and many more. The round trip mission, including time in transit to Mars and back to Earth, and the time on the Martian surface will take about 2 years. Currently, the longest time spent in space is 437 days, or a little over 14 months. And that's due to the limits of the human body and what happens to the human body when they are without gravity. So this specific mission will need engineers to design, build, test, and visualize that future to make it a reality. Those engineers may not get credit, as we have found that from some of the other talks, that we have to go and research what engineers did and what they delivered in the past. And with these, some of them may not get credit, but without them, the dream is not going to be possible. So the big question is, who will be the first human on Mars? So if we go forward, And think about engineering. And if we Google what engineering is, you get the basic definition that engineers are the foundation. They are the creators of our everyday lives. I love engineering for this reason. They are the creators of our everyday lives. Without them, we would not see improvements that we see every day. So now if you Google famous female and you read through, the automated suggestions and results, you get singer, actor, artist, athlete. But do you get engineer? No, we don't see engineer, and we need to change that. And that needs to be part of our future, because women in engineering are women in business, and they are engineering a sustainable future, a social world for us to really excel in. Women engineers are in the business of infrastructure, building, flying, driving, energy, science, medicine, manufacturing. We're in the business of making lives better. So women engineering has done so much to really build out where we're at and what we can do. If we look at the different areas of engineering, what are they doing? In energy, we're looking at a sustainable future. Engineering is driving us to net carbon zero. There's a lot of talk about that right now and about what companies are doing with their mission and their vision to drive it forward. Our engineers are really driving that forward. In aerospace, I just talked about engineering to Mars by 2035 as a really good example of sustainability for the planet and further research. Manufacturing, semiconductor technology. If you think about size and scale right now with Moore's law, the power of the computer will double every 18 months. If you think about that and put it into context, in order to continue the growth, you must continue to shrink the geometries of the components. So if you think about the manufacturing process, to give us devices that are improved every year and a half, the manufacturing process has to change to subatomic levels. The equipment used to etch, clean rooms, processing, the human interaction with it. So really with manufacturing, we're embracing additive manufacturing. We're embracing 3D printing, wearables, really the warehouse productivity increases to keep up with innovation. Engineers drive all of that. With construction, with infrastructure, smart city construction with civil and electrical engineering, biomedical, precision diagnostics and treatment, in medical engineering, COVID response. I think when you think about the COVID response, it's been really big. We talk about a lot of the scientists who have come up in the pharma area with the actual vaccines. But then you think about the mass distribution and how in manufacturing that mass distribution, we had to plan and process and really engineer that. Again, engineers behind the scenes, really making sure that vaccines get to everybody around the world. When we go to the agricultural side, you think about global food supplies through agricultural engineering, robotics, advancing robotics and automation, Industry 4.0. Think about the smart factory, automation and data exchange. This all ties into cloud computing. Right now, companies are focused on exponential growth. They're thinking about what does the future hold for us and where do we go? And where does this start? This starts with people. This starts with people and like with the engineers that we've celebrated today. So if we think about the people side of it, I'm putting up here at Airswift our superhero. So you got the superhero on the left. And you need to think about the types of skills that we look for in engineers and how they can really build out that future. And what's the foundation to be able to build that future? So what are the skills that an engineering hero is going to have and develop in order to really grow that future? In a keynote speech at the 2017 IEE Vision Innovation Challenge Summit, the Stanford University engineering professor James Plunger said that engineers of the future will be a different breed of people than the engineers we educated in the 20th century. Engineers are changing, they're evolving. The skills for our future engineers and even our engineers today, they need to have lifelong learning capabilities. They have to have a huge appetite for curiosity and creativity. That innovation has to have that spark, that drive that we just heard about from Amy, the imagination. They must have a change mindset. So they have to be able to see a different future, visualize it, and be resilient to drive it. And more than anything, one must be collaborative to make this work. According to the Harvard Business Review, communication tools, 74%, and collaboration tools at 67%, are the two most important prerequisites for an employee to be effective. So that's just for an employee to be effective. If you think about engineers now, engineers can come up with really great ideas, and they have to be able to communicate that, not just to each other, but across functions, across genders, across nationalities, across nations. They need to be able to work together in a way that really can build upon each other's strengths. And when you think about how you communicate across functions, get other functions of a business to be able to understand it, support it, and give you the other skills to help really make it come to life. In many of our universities around the world right now, some of our engineering students are not quite required to take communication classes with their engineering curriculum. It's an area that's really needed, and a lot of our young students now are realizing that and getting their communication and collaboration through societies like the Women's Engineering Society. So how can you unleash your own superpowers? How can you really unleash this and drive that collaboration? And what's been holding us back? I smiled and was really happy when we heard Fadeelah Kenny speak earlier about this today, about what's really holding us back, and where she spoke about sharing her own, she had the courage to speak about her own vulnerability and insight into what could hold her back. KPMG ran this recent study, and this was of female executives all around the world who ranged in different industries with more than 150 of the world's leading organizations. So this was a cross mix. This is women focused. And we do know that this impacts men as well. And it was really interesting because these were hand-selected women by their CEOs, by their executives who are in positions of power. And this imposter syndrome still comes out with women who have, quote, made it to different levels of their career. And in order to collaborate, this is something that we really need to understand within ourselves and be able to address. But it showed that 75% of executive women report having personally experienced imposter syndrome at certain points in their career. 85% believe imposter syndrome is commonly experienced by women in corporate environments. 74% of executive women believe that their male counterparts do not experience the feelings of self-doubt as much as they do. Now, we know that they do, but they're thinking they feel it a lot more. And then 81% believe that they put more pressure on themselves not to fail than men do. And if we think about imposter syndrome and how that holds us back, if we're in a meeting with a group of our peers or with a group of cross-functional expertise, and we have these feelings of self-doubt, that tends to make a person not speak up, to not voice their opinion, to not share their ideas. And what that does is pull back the entire group from being able to advance that idea even further. So I really want to push on this point that says all of our engineers out there, all of our brilliant people, both women and men, you guys work together so well in so many different areas. If you have an idea, be brave enough, stomach that courage to be able to share it and to drive that collaboration, because that's what's going to take us into the future. It's those crazy ideas, those big picture ideas, the breakthrough ideas that really take us to that next level with that perseverance, that courage, and that determination that you can really muster to share with others. So rip off your mask, don't hide behind that mask, put on your cape and be heard. So now I want to take you back to the future. Again, you are the future. You are the pioneers who are going to break through and create the future. Engineers can make a difference in almost every field and in our daily lives. So how can we transform the future? So I want us to first imagine. So across all these different areas of engineering, all the women that we celebrated today, with engineering, it starts with communications. So with anything, with any new idea, everything starts with communications. And right now we communicate across 5G. So beyond that, what will that be, XG? What will the future be for where we go? We must be advanced to connect our networks in a resilient way with no outages, which will equal boundless opportunities for collaboration, idea sharing, and growth. Think about how we can take machine learning and accelerate it forward with the ability to have the communication line completely tied together. Now, if we've got communications right, I want you to now close your eyes and think for a moment and just imagine the future. Go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future and think about what the future of engineering can be and what it can bring to us. Can it bring to us electronic autonomous air travel? Engineers can do that. Can it be remote robotic complex surgical procedures? Imagine your key doctors and physicians in one country who can perform brilliant surgeries in another with the help of robotics. Boundaryless access to education. Think about our immersive education in parts of the world that are without the key elements to really give them the education to be able to think and imagine forward. Seamless communication in any language. We can eradicate cancer. And there's so many other medical breakthroughs that we can do in the future. Affordable space travel. Why not? The future is now. What we're creating, what we're coming up with, our ideas, how we build them, that future is today, that future is now. The question for you is, what will you be known for as you start to build? So if I come back to space for a minute, and we'll go back to our astronauts. To date, 569 people have been into space, of which 65 are female. If you look on the left here, these images include Christina Koch and Jessica Meir, who completed the first women-only spacewalk. And they just did that recently, which was outside of the International Space Station. So that was a pretty historic sight to see, where it was 2 women doing that spacewalk together. On the right here is Alyssa Carson. So, AKA NASA. She is the youngest to be accepted and graduate the Advanced Possum Academy, officially making her certified to go to space and an astronaut trainee. Alyssa has been quoted to be driven by an insatiable desire to live life to the fullest, to break through the ceiling of possibility, and make a positive and lasting impact on the world. She was 17 years old when she was accepted. She is 19 years old now, and she is still going. She has said, always follow your dream and don't let anyone take it from you. Don't let anyone take it from you. It's amazing as you talk to our young students and those coming up through university right now, where they view the possibilities of what this future can be and how we can pull it together and how they can really make their mark on future history and what our future will be. I want to say that heroes are made by choice. It's through your own determination. It's through your own imagination and your vision, and where you can take your career and your job and really make your mark on society. And in the future, I also see that equality, diversity, inclusion, it won't be something that we have to talk about much anymore, because we'll all be living it. It will be so part of our core DNA and how we operate seamlessly around the world that DE&I will just be a thing of the past in our history books that we're talking about. Everybody will have an equal opportunity to chase their dreams and to really go after the career and the impact that they're looking for. If you can think it, you can achieve it, and you can build it. So again, heroes are made by choice. What is yours? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Truly motivational words, Janette. And there are a few questions coming through, and there's lots of comments in the chat, but I'll just pick out a couple. You talk about motivation, you talk about breaking through the ceiling of possibility. Clearly, you've attained an awful lot yourself. Were there any moments in your career where you had to break through that ceiling? You know, what have been your setbacks and how have you navigated around them?
Oh, absolutely. So I think I don't think any person can tell you that they haven't. They'd be fooling themselves. To get to the levels that I've gotten to my career, I've absolutely had hardships. I've had times where I wanted to just scream and go, what? Where are we going? I would say I've had different setbacks where I look at every setback as an opportunity. So I've had setbacks in who I report to. Sometimes I've had people I report to where I have not, really respected them, and have thought I've had wonderful people that I've absolutely respected who've been great mentors. But in your career, you can't always have the perfect boss. You're going to have lots of different people that you work with. And there was one that told me, this was early on, and this was probably one of those defining moments for me. And I was young, I was in my 20s, and I was an up and comer and just like really good at what I did. And I had a new boss, and she sat down and she told me, she looked at me and she said, it took me 9 years to be a VP. It will take you at least that long. If not longer, you may not ever get there. And she was so harsh with her words and so direct. It like hit me to the core. It like punched me. And I was like, okay, this is where mentors really help. This is where you need to go and like get your core group together and say, all right, self-check here. Am I really that bad? Or is it just one person's perspective? So I kind of thank her for that now, because it drove me. It lit a fire in me that I cannot extinguish, and it is going. And for somebody to say that to somebody else, and for the person who receives it, I think the lesson I've learned through my different setbacks and for feedback that I've had is that's one person's opinion. That is one person's opinion. You make you define who you are, you define where you're going, and you can create it. So if you take that feedback and you turn it and you learn from it and you flip it on its head and you turn it into opportunity, you can create your own future. So if you put yourself in that driver's seat and you go where you want to go, you'll find your path, you'll find your tribe, you'll find your way to get there. But don't let people define for you what you can and cannot do. Do not. Too many times throughout my career, people have tried to do that. And it's just, you got to stay focused and you got to stay on what you want. And you got to make some difficult decisions at certain points if you're with a group that doesn't believe. So you can make those decisions throughout your career, and it'll end up in a better place, and you'll feel better for it.
Very, very wise words, and I can definitely relate to those myself. And talking of finding your path, Lucille's got an interesting question, which is, have you always known what path you wanted to take in your career, or have you gone with the flow and changed direction?
No, I did not know the path I wanted to take. So growing up, I actually wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. And then life took me down a different direction, and I ended up in business where I find it funny that through life, you always set your goals and you can see what's right in front of you. So my goal would be, okay, how do I become what, the direct person I report to does, or, and you set a goal that way. It was, I decided to get my MBA when I was in my lower 30s. And when I sat down for that interview to get accepted to Duke University for my MBA program, they asked me what I wanted to do with it. And that was the first time I actually voiced, I want to be a CEO. And so at that point, when the words came out, I was like, ooh, that is a little heavy. Like I actually said it. So it manifested there. And my MBA program was absolutely amazing. I did that while I was an SVP and working full time. So balancing that 2 years was really difficult. But it set me on a path where my head went, okay, I put it out there. I put it out to the universe. How am I going to make this happen? And what are the stages for it? So you can set goals, but you find throughout your career, sometimes those goals evolve and they change because you're growing. They change because you realize you hit a certain goal and now what's next and where else can I go? And oh, I thought I could only do this, but I can do so much more. So it can really build upon it as you set your sights for something else.
And that's so true. And talking of doing so much more, it strikes me that your life, both career, family, and all of the pro bono stuff that you do, is absolutely jam-packed. How do you prioritize? So I'm sure you get many requests for your time, like today, and thank you for being so generous with your time. But how do you prioritize, and how do you decide what's right for you and what to say no to? Or perhaps you never say no, I don't know.
No, I have to say no. Saying no is hard, but you do have to find your way to say no. It's funny because I heard somebody also speak in the past. I was at a conference where it was pretty much all men that were speaking. And she said, well, we asked women and they all said no. And I was like, well, you didn't ask me. You didn't ask all women then. I'm like, there's women who will say yes. I'm like, women say yes. So I went on like this yes, like push of, come on, women, let's say yes and get involved and do what we can. But no is a good word too. So you have to find balance through it, and you have to know what's important for you to say yes to, and then what's important for you to, reprioritize and maybe not be able to do. So I have found through my prioritization, it's also about bringing my team in and having my team work with me as well. So it's all not just me, but it also shares in the experience with others. So for instance, my work, my day job, that always takes a priority. The work we're doing, we just completed a merger, just announced it on Monday. So Airswift and Competentia are coming together now. So that I just did a big refinance, and we are now traded for our bond on the Norwegian Stock Exchange. So that was a big move too. So we had a couple of really big things happening over the last couple months that we were working through. So that took a major priority. So work and the people that I work with always take, a top priority when I'm looking at my inbox or my calendar, or what I have to do for that day. And I set my goals. From a company perspective, we set our strategic priorities at the beginning of each year. So we have our long-term goals, and then every year we have our strategic priorities. So I set my priorities based on how I set our company's priorities. And then we kind of get our groups and our leaders and our teams grouped around those goals and how we're driving them. And then we have a regular cadence of how we're measuring to them. So company and my people here come, I've got to focus on that. Family, of course, I need to talk about too. So my family, I've got my time on my weekends, my holidays planned, etc. And you need to be fully present when you're with your family and with your family time. And then all of my nonprofit work, all of my community work, all of the give back type of work that I do, that's where I pull others in with me as well. So I chair the CEOs Against Cancer here in Houston. We do a lot of work with our communities and our businesses to really share on that. But I bring in other people, like my head of marketing helps me with that one. Junior Achievement, where we're really working on grade school children up through to graduation before university. One of my top account management leads helps me with that one. So I pull in other people so that they can give back as well, and they can help me balance my overall workload and what we do. But there is time when you make it. You just need to focus on what's most important first thing in the morning, first when you wake up, and then get on throughout the day. I do like to work out first thing in the morning, otherwise it never gets done. So if I don't do it first thing in the morning, it's not going to happen that day. So.
I know the feeling, and I have to say that I'm completely awed by your energy and the amount of positivity that you've brought, and it's been a real fantastic wrap to our INWED session today, and so inspiring. So thank you for being very generous with your time, and congratulations on the recent merger. Sounds like you've got so many exciting things going on. But thank you for spending the time with us today, Janette, and
my pleasure.
I wish you the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. And so that brings us to a conclusion for today. And I have to say, it's been an awe-inspiring day. And I cannot believe the absolute fantastic speeches that we've had, the inspirational women that we've had speaking, but also the inspirational women that were the winners of the WE 50 this year, our engineering heroes. Every single one of them, most definitely a hero in themselves. All of the speakers, Major Angela Laycock, Fadeelah Kenny, Jane Priston, and of course, most recently, Janette Marx, have been really generous with their time. And we're very indebted to them. And I hope that you enjoyed their talks. I'm sure if you have more questions, you can post them in the Q&A. And I can see there's still comments coming through, and some have been answered. So please do have a look. If you asked a question earlier, there may well be an answer stuck in the Q&A there. I'd also like to thank once again all of our sponsors who so very generously have allowed us to put this presentation on, and also to bring the awards to all of our We50 winners. And of course to our media partners as well, who helped us to spread the message far and wide. One thing I will say is last year we trended #1 on Twitter, and I think so far we've got up to #2. So please do keep posting on Twitter, do keep sharing through LinkedIn and on Instagram to try and get us up to #1. Our reach has been literally hundreds of millions. So thank you for that, and please do keep inspiring. If you want to see any more on this, then visit inwed.org.uk, and there's some more engineering heroes stories on there, all of our inspirational ladies that were featured today, plus so many more, and stories from various companies. I've seen coming through the chat and through the feed that many of you have been putting in your "I was the first woman to" type stories, so please do keep sending those through to Helen, because we very much need to know everything we can so that we don't have to set up another centenary trail in the future and uncover all of the amazing work that you've done. So it just really brings me to wrap today, and thank you all so much for your participation, and do continue to enjoy INWED and carry on posting, carry on sharing. And I know there are some other events going on around the world. So thank you so much for joining us. Take care, and we hope to see you all in person soon once we get out of this pandemic. Happy INWED. Thank you very much. Goodbye.